The Siberian wind howled, an unrelenting force that could freeze a man's bones in seconds. The snow was endless, frozen plains stretching in all directions, blending into a horizon swallowed by gray clouds. Emily Frost's breath came in heavy, sharp gasps as she trudged forward, her boots cutting through the snow with each step. The cold nipped at her skin, but it was the solitude that made the place feel even colder. She was used to the harsh elements. She had spent years in these conditions, training in them, surviving them. Yet today, something felt different, like the air itself held a danger she couldn't pinpoint. It was supposed to be just a routine mission. A few hours tops. She was tasked with gathering intel on unusual seismic activity in the region. Nothing too complex. But now, her instincts screamed at her, warning of something she couldn't see, couldn't hear, yet felt deep within her core. She quickened her pace, scanning the horizon. Her earpiece crackled to life, a faint static punctuated by the voice of her commander. "Emily, status report." "Everything's fine," she replied, her tone calm, betraying none of the tension tightening in her chest. "Just a little colder than expected. Proceeding with the mission." "Copy that." "Stay sharp, Frost." A cold gust of wind whipped past her, and she adjusted the collar of her jacket. Her pulse quickened, the hairs on the back of her neck prickling. There was no logical reason for the unease, yet it was undeniable. She scanned the landscape once more, focusing on the distant ridges of snow-covered mountains. Nothing moved. The world was silent, save for the wind. Then she heard it, barely a whisper at first. A low hum, almost imperceptible, like the sound of distant machinery. Before she could react, a sudden shift in the air signaled movement. The snow beneath her feet trembled. It was too late. A massive shadow appeared in the periphery of her vision, and before she could turn, a heavy arm wrapped around her chest, yanking her off her feet. Her survival instincts kicked in. She twisted, driving her elbow into the figure's ribs. The man, no, the creature, grunted, but didn't release her. Another pair of arms grabbed her legs, forcing her into a prone position. The weight of them crushed her into the snow. "What the hell?" Emily hissed, struggling to break free, but her efforts were in vain. There were more of them now, 4, 5, too many for her to handle alone. She managed to twist her neck just enough to see her captors, though it took everything in her to hold on to consciousness as they tightened their grip. They were tall, armored beings, their exoskeletons glinting under the overcast sky. Each one was a grotesque fusion of alien and machine, with harsh, angular features and an unsettlingly calm demeanor. Their cold, mechanical eyes locked onto hers. "Another human," one of them growled. His voice was deep, almost like a growl from the belly of a beast, and yet laced with something colder, disinterest, perhaps even disdain. His eyes narrowed as he ran his gaze over her body, assessing her as if she were nothing more than an object. "What do you want from me?" Emily spat, her breath ragged. The lead hunter stepped forward, his voice dripping with cruel amusement. "What do we want?" "A trophy. And you, little human, are just the latest." Trophy. The word felt like a slap. She wasn't the first to be captured by these alien hunters, but she was determined not to be their next conquest. "Not going to happen," she muttered under her breath, the words meant only for herself. But her captors were already working quickly, expertly, as if they had done this 1,000 times. One of them reached for a device on his belt, and with a flick of his wrist, a small, vibrating pulse swept through her body, rendering her limbs numb. She could feel her muscles locking in place, her body losing its ability to fight back. Another of the hunters crouched beside her. "We'll get more than a trophy from you. Your kind, humans, are weak. We hunt for sport, and you'll make a fine addition to our collection." "Let go of me!" Emily snapped, but her voice was weak. The pulse from the device had already drained most of her strength. As they hoisted her up, the realization hit her hard, a flash of panic that only lasted a moment before her training took over. She couldn't allow herself to fall apart, not now, not with everything at stake. These hunters were not just here for sport, they were here for something worse. She could feel it in her gut. Her dog tags were still there, cold against her chest. It was a simple set of metal tags, but they meant everything. A link to Earth. A symbol of who she was, a soldier, a survivor. And these aliens, these hunters, were going to regret underestimating her. "Tell me your name," one of the hunters asked, as they began dragging her through the snow, the friction causing her skin to burn. "Emily," she rasped, her voice hoarse but defiant. "Emily Frost." The lead hunter stopped walking. "Frost. Interesting. Let's see what kind of strength lies behind that name." They moved quickly, unbothered by her protests. Emily struggled, tried to use the snow beneath her to twist free, but their grip was ironclad. The only thing she could do now was observe, learn their movements, study their weaknesses. If there was one thing she knew about these kinds of enemies, it was that they had their blind spots. As they continued their journey, she could make out their ship in the distance, a massive structure floating in the air like a dark mountain against the white landscape. The hum she had heard earlier grew louder, confirming her worst fear. This wasn't just a random encounter. These aliens had been tracking her. They knew who she was, or at least, they knew what she represented. Her mind raced. She had to survive. The only question now was how. The cold metal floor of the ship was an unforgiving surface against Emily's skin. Her body ached, bruises already forming from her rough treatment. They had thrown her into a holding cell, nothing more than a dark, metallic box with barely enough space to sit up straight. The faint hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the walls, and she could feel it in her bones. The air inside was sterile, the scent of machinery and recycled oxygen mixing with the sharp tang of fear. Emily pressed her back against the cold wall, trying to steady her breath. Her limbs still felt heavy from the immobilizing pulse that had drained most of her strength, but her mind was sharp, too sharp to allow panic to overtake her. She was still alive, which meant she still had a chance. A chance to escape. A chance to fight back. Minutes passed. She listened intently to the ship's noises, the low, constant thrum of alien engines, the clink of metal footsteps outside the door, and the occasional hiss of airlock's ceiling. Nothing about this felt right. She had heard of the Zakro, the hunters who prowled the far reaches of the galaxy, preying on lesser species for sport. It was a game to them, a twisted thrill of chasing down weaker beings and hunting them like animals. But Emily wasn't weak. The thought made her mouth twitch into a brief, bitter smile. Her survival training had been grueling. She'd been prepared for scenarios just like this. Her military superiors had drilled her relentlessly: physical endurance, stealth tactics, improvisation, combat. Everything. They had known this day might come. She had been trained for a war that hadn't even started yet. And now here she was, captive. The door to the cell slid open with a faint hiss, and a tall, armored figure stepped inside, blocking out most of the light. His face was hidden behind a smooth, reflective visor, but the chill in his posture spoke volumes. "You are awake!" The voice was mechanical, distorted. The alien's voice gave no hint of emotion, as if he were reading from a script. Emily glared at him, but said nothing. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Instead, she focused on his movements, noting the stiffness of his posture, the way his hands rested on his weapons. The alien stepped closer, tilting his head slightly, as though studying her. "You are different from the others. Most humans beg. You have not." "I'm not like most humans," Emily replied, her voice low, steady. The alien's head tilted again, and he stepped back slightly. "A soldier, then? Why? Are you afraid of soldiers?" She shot back, the word sharp, calculated. The Zakro hunter remained silent for a moment, his gaze never leaving her face. "I am not afraid," he finally said. "But it is unusual. They never last long. They break. But you are not broken. Why?" Emily shifted in her seat, feeling the old wounds from the harsh fight she had put up earlier begin to throb. "Because I don't quit." The alien didn't respond. Instead, he stepped closer, placing a hand on the energy barrier that kept her confined to the small cell. "The others," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They do not know what it is like. The thrill of the hunt. But you, perhaps you will understand. Humans are weak. You cannot win this. You cannot escape." Emily remained silent, but her mind was already racing. If these hunters thought she was weak, if they believed they could break her just by holding her captive, they were about to learn the cost of underestimating humanity. The Zakro might have superior technology, but they didn't understand what made humans dangerous: our ingenuity, our will to survive, and the brutal unpredictability we carried within us. The alien stared at her for a long moment, his unblinking visor reflecting her face. Finally, he stepped back, gesturing to the door. "You will come with me," he said, his voice cold. Emily didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere until I know what you're planning to do with me." The Zakro hunter stepped closer again, his hand tightening on his weapon. "You will be used. Your species is a rare trophy. We will make an example of you, human. When we are done, you will be displayed for all to see. Your humiliation will be a lesson to your kind." Emily's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't show it. Her mind churned with the implications of his words. They weren't just going to kill her. They were going to use her as a symbol, a way to break humanity's spirit. She could almost hear the whispers of the Zakro hunters as they boasted of their victory. They would turn her into an object, something they could parade through the galaxy as proof of their dominance. But they didn't know her. They didn't know what she was capable of. "I'm not afraid of your games," Emily said, her voice steady despite the cold grip of fear that tightened around her chest. "You can try to break me, but you won't succeed." The alien regarded her, his expression unreadable behind the visor. After a moment, he turned and gestured to the door once more. "Come," he ordered. "The hunt begins now." The door opened, and Emily stood, her body still stiff and sore. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear: she wasn't going to be their trophy. Not without a fight. As they escorted her down the sterile, cold corridors of the ship, she observed everything. The layout of the ship. The number of guards. The weapons they carried. Her mind was already working, calculating. She needed to bide her time. She needed to wait for the right moment. She couldn't afford to make a move too soon. She glanced up at her captor. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice steady. The Zakro didn't even flinch. "I am Kroth, leader of the hunt." Emily smirked, despite the situation. "Kroth, huh? How cute. You're gonna need more than that to take me down." The alien said nothing, his gait unchanged, but his fingers tightened on his weapon ever so slightly. As they entered a large chamber, filled with unfamiliar machinery, Emily knew that the real game was about to begin. She had survived worse than this. And if Kroth thought he had her cornered, he was in for a very unpleasant surprise. The ship's walls hummed around Emily like the heartbeat of some massive, living creature. Its cold, mechanical nature clashed with the faint warmth that still clung to her body despite the numbness of her limbs. Her captors, those Zakro hunters, had been preparing for their twisted game. She had been paraded through their dark halls, each step feeling more like a countdown to her fate. But even in her captivity, she had never stopped thinking. She had never stopped fighting. The chamber where they had taken her was vast, its high ceiling illuminated by harsh, flickering lights that cast long shadows on the walls. Metal panels stretched around her like a cage. Her wrists were shackled, her body pressed against a cool, hard table in the center of the room. The air smelled sterile, but beneath that, there was a faint, acrid scent, one that made her stomach churn. They had stripped her of her gear. Her knife, her comms unit, her personal belongings, all taken. The dog tag she wore, however, remained around her neck, hidden beneath the fabric of her torn jacket. She couldn't afford to let them know what those represented. Not yet. The door to the chamber opened with a hiss, and the unmistakable silhouette of Kroth entered. His massive form filled the doorway, casting a long shadow across the room. Behind him, his two subordinates flanked him like guard dogs, their movements silent, efficient. Croth's gaze locked onto her, and though his face was obscured behind his helmet, Emily could feel the coldness radiating from him. Are you comfortable? Croth's voice was sharp, devoid of any emotion. Emily lifted her chin, her defiance shining through despite the shackles. I've been more comfortable. Croth didn't acknowledge her retort, his posture still and imposing. You will learn. You will all learn, he muttered under his breath, mostly to himself. Emily's mind was already working. He had said it, he was planning to use her as an example. But she wasn't a piece in their twisted game, not a trophy to be paraded in front of some bloodthirsty audience. She was human. And that meant something the Zakro had yet to understand. Croth stepped closer, his gaze traveling from her face to her bound hands. Your species has no place in this galaxy, human. The others, the ones who have been broken before you, are proof enough of that. Emily's lips curled into a tight, humorless smile. You talk too much for someone who's about to lose. He tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. Lose? You truly believe you have a chance? I believe I'll be the one who decides who wins, she said, her voice low, steady. Croth's hand twitched slightly toward his weapon. But he held himself in check. For a moment, there was an unsettling silence. He was trying to read her. Trying to understand how this human, this mere girl, could exude such confidence in the face of certain defeat. It's a mistake to underestimate your enemies, she continued, meeting his gaze with unflinching intensity. That's the first thing they teach you in any war. Croth leaned in closer, his massive form towering over her. What's your plan, human? Do you think you can escape? Break free of your chains? You are nothing compared to us. I'm more than you'll ever be, Emily said, her voice soft but fierce. The Zakro stared down at her for a long moment, as if contemplating something. Then he straightened, gesturing to one of his subordinates. Prepare her for the arena. The games begin soon. We will see how long your arrogance lasts. The two guards moved forward, their movements deliberate, but Emily was already thinking ahead. Her shackles were tight, but the metal wasn't impervious. She had spent years working with tools, learning how to manipulate the environment around her. Every inch of the ship was a puzzle waiting to be solved. The guards stepped too close, their hands reaching for her restraints. Emily's hand, still hidden beneath her jacket, brushed against the small device hidden at her waist, an old-fashioned lockpick she had managed to smuggle in during her initial capture. It was small, simple, but it would work. The moment they reached for her, she tensed, waiting for the right opportunity. As the guard's hand closed around the restraint, Emily twisted her body with explosive force, using her free leg to sweep one of them off his feet. The other guard stumbled back in shock. In the same breath, Emily's fingers flicked the small lockpick into the lock, and with a quick twist, she freed herself. The guards scrambled to react, but Emily was already moving. She threw herself into a roll, reaching for a nearby metal bar that had been discarded on the floor. She didn't need to kill them, just incapacitate them long enough to get a head start. She swung the bar, knocking one of the guards back against the wall. The second guard lunged, but she was quicker, her boot connecting with his chest and sending him sprawling to the ground. Cross stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide behind the helmet. Emily didn't give him time to recover. She moved fast, too fast for them to react, too quick for their machines to process. She darted toward the door, but before she could reach it, a familiar hum filled the air. A force field materialized, blocking her path. Emily froze for a split second, cursing under her breath. She had hoped for a clear exit, but the Zakro had anticipated her move. Croth's voice echoed through the chamber, cutting through the rising tension. You cannot win. You can fight, struggle, and resist, but it will be futile. You will be broken. All of you. Emily glanced at the force field, then back at the two guards groaning on the floor. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. I'm not broken yet, Emily said, her voice full of resolve. And I'm not going to let you make me your trophy. Not today! Croth's laugh echoed in the chamber, but it lacked confidence, as though something had shifted in him. something that made him uncertain for the first time. Emily's heart raced as she took in the room, assessing her next move. The arena, the hunters, the ship, everything was connected. She would find her way out, find a way to turn the tables. There was no quitting now. "You'll regret underestimating me," Emily said, her voice cold and determined. The metallic hum of the ship never stopped. It reverberated in Emily's bones, a constant reminder that she was still a prisoner aboard the Zakro vessel. But today, something was different. She could feel it in the air, the stillness before the storm. The hunters were too confident, too sure of their victory. That was their mistake. She had bided her time, watching, learning. The ship was a labyrinth, but she was starting to understand its patterns. The security systems, once seemingly impenetrable, had become familiar. She had watched the guards, noted their shifts, and most importantly, discovered a crack in their surveillance. The arena where she was supposed to be presented, where they planned to humiliate her in front of a gallery of the galaxy's elite, was her opportunity. She wouldn't be their pawn. She was going to flip the game on its head. The holding cells were a long way from the arena, but the route was well trodden. Guards passed by regularly, but their movements were predictable. The air ducts, however, were a different matter. Small enough for a human to crawl through, but large enough to carry sound. Emily had spent days mentally mapping the ship's ventilation system, and now, as the door to her cell slid open, she was ready. 2 guards entered, their heavy boots scraping against the floor. They were unaware, unprepared for what was about to happen. "Time to go," one of them muttered, his voice muffled behind his helmet. He approached Emily, who was sitting against the wall with her head lowered, pretending to be submissive. It was a tactic she had used before, feign weakness until the moment was right. She didn't move as he got closer, his steps slow and heavy, confident in his control. But Emily wasn't weak. She was calculating. As soon as he was within arm's reach, she sprang. Her hand shot out, grabbing the guard's arm, twisting it behind his back with the force of years of combat training. The guard let out a surprised grunt, but Emily didn't give him time to react. She swung herself around his back, using his body as a shield, and sent a brutal knee into his side. The guard crumpled, gasping for air. The second guard reached for his weapon, but Emily was already on him. She had learned that the key to defeating these hunters wasn't brute strength, it was speed and precision. Before the guard could draw his blaster, she dropped low, sliding beneath his outstretched arm and knocking his legs out from under him. He hit the ground with a thud, stunned, but Emily didn't wait for him to recover. She grabbed the discarded blaster from the first guard and pointed it at the remaining one. "Move, and I'll drop you right where you stand," she said, her voice sharp and cold. The guard froze, eyes wide with fear. "Who are you?" he managed to say, the question more out of confusion than threat. "I'm the one who's going to take you down," she answered, her finger tightening around the trigger. The guard gulped but didn't move. Emily's mind raced. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about taking control. The guards, though well-trained, were no match for the raw focus she had honed over years of military discipline. She could feel the momentum shifting, the power slowly leaving their hands and slipping into hers. With a swift motion, she knocked the second guard unconscious, ensuring he would stay down long enough to allow her to escape. She quickly stripped both of them of their weapons, securing one for herself and leaving the other in a heap beside the unconscious bodies. She hadn't come this far to be captured again. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from adrenaline. She moved quickly, silently, knowing every second counted. The hallway stretched before her, eerily quiet after the brief scuffle. She was still too close to the holding cells, and though she had taken down the guards, the ship's security was vast. Her next move would be crucial. She had to reach the ship's control room, the heart of the Zakro vessel. From there, she could disable the ship's systems, lock down the internal cameras, and create chaos, just enough to throw the hunters off balance, and give her the opening she needed. Emily glanced at the control pad by the door, her mind processing the security protocols she had observed earlier. A few quick keystrokes, and the door to the hallway opened with a soft hiss. She stepped out into the corridor, her footsteps muffled by the thick metal floor. She didn't slow down. Every moment of hesitation could be her last. The ship's layout had become more familiar over the past few days, but the closer she got to the command center, the more the tension built. She needed to stay ahead, stay unpredictable. The guards might be down, but the ship was still crawling with more of them. The hallway widened, the metallic surfaces reflecting her own image as she passed, a reminder of how small and fragile she appeared to them. But appearances could be deceiving. Turning a corner, Emily ducked into an alcove as a group of hunters passed by, their voices low but carrying the hint of amusement. They had no idea that the tables were turning. They were so sure of their victory, so confident in their control. It was a mistake she would make them regret. She waited, her body tense, until the sound of their footsteps faded. Then, with a controlled breath, she continued forward. The control room was just ahead. The door was heavily guarded, but Emily had been watching. The guards rotated shifts like clockwork, and she had learned the exact moment when the last guard would leave for a break. She wasn't far from the terminal now, and she knew she had to act quickly. A moment passed. The door was unguarded. With swift precision, she moved to the control panel, her fingers flying over the buttons as she initiated the override sequence she had memorized from watching the guards. The display blinked to life, and she keyed in a series of codes, each one designed to disable the ship's security systems. The hum of the ship seemed to shift. There was a faint, almost imperceptible change in the air as the ship's internal systems began to reroute. A low alert blared briefly, just enough to signal her presence. But by the time anyone realized what had happened, it would be too late. "Done," Emily whispered, a smile pulling at the corners of her lips. The security cameras went dark. The doors that had once been locked now opened at her command. The Zakro hunters were no longer in control. She had turned the tables. Now, the real game would begin. The ship's metal corridors echoed with the sounds of distant alarms, but Emily was already moving through the shadows. The security override had worked, just as she had planned, but the moment of advantage was fleeting. The Zakro hunters would be scrambling. They would realize their mistake, but by then, she would be one step ahead. She couldn't afford to waste time. Every second mattered now. Her boots made no sound as she glided through the hallway, the ship's usual hum replaced by a rising crescendo of confusion and panic. The ship's internal security was in disarray. The surveillance systems, her primary target, were offline. Doors that were once locked now slid open at her command. There was a brief moment of triumph in her chest, but it was short-lived. She couldn't allow herself the luxury of celebrating. She had a mission to complete, and it wouldn't be over until she had the upper hand. Emily paused in front of a door, waiting for the guard to pass. She could hear his footsteps growing closer. As soon as he was in range, she slipped behind him, using his own momentum to shove him face first into the wall. He grunted in surprise, but before he could react, Emily knocked him out cold, leaving him slumped against the metal panel. She checked the console next to the door, ensuring that it remained unlocked before slipping inside. The control room. The heart of the Zakro vessel. It was quiet now, but Emily knew better than to let her guard down. She had come this far, but the hardest part was yet to come. The room was spacious, with rows of consoles lined up along the walls, their screens flickering erratically as the ship's systems scrambled to reassert control. Emily quickly assessed the room, her mind racing through the steps she needed to take. Croth would be close, he had to be. He wouldn't let her reach this point without a final confrontation. She moved to the central console, her fingers flying over the controls. A holographic display flickered to life in front of her, casting a pale blue light across her face. She had already disabled the primary defenses, but she still needed to trigger the secondary systems, disable the power core, initiate a lockdown in the main hangar, and most importantly, seal Croth and his hunters inside the command center. It was the perfect trap. Once she had control of the ship's power, she would leave them stranded, unable to escape. But it had to be done carefully. One wrong move, and the entire plan could backfire. As she worked, the doors to the rooms slammed open. Her heart skipped a beat. Cross stood in the doorway, flanked by two of his elite hunters. The door hissed shut behind him, and the room felt smaller, darker, with each step he took toward her. "Enough of your games, human!" Croth growled, his voice low and predatory. His presence seemed to fill the room, and for a moment, Emily's pulse quickened, but she steadied herself. This was her moment. "I told you," Emily said, not looking up from the console. "You're not the one in control here anymore." Croth's armor gleamed in the dim light, his hands resting on the hilt of his weapon. His hunters flanked him, their faces hidden behind dark helmets, but Emily could feel their eyes on her, waiting for their leader's command. "You think you can stop us? You think you can defeat me?" Croth's voice was filled with disdain. "I've hunted species across the galaxy. I've seen them break. You will break too." "I don't break," Emily said, her voice cold, steady. "And neither will my people." The moment her words left her mouth, Emily hit the final key sequence. The ship shuddered, the power core groaning as the lights flickered. Croth's eyes widened in realization. "No!" he shouted, but it was too late. The ship's systems went into lockdown. The emergency alarms blared, but the doors to the control room were sealed shut. Croth slammed his fist against the wall in frustration, his gaze turning to Emily, who finally stood, locking eyes with him. "You wanted a trophy," she said, her voice sharp. "Now you're going to get one. Except it won't be me. It'll be you and your hunters stuck here, with no way out. Do you think you can outsmart me?" Cross sneered, stepping forward. His hunters followed suit, weapons drawn. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the hilt of the blaster at her side. She wasn't afraid. She'd faced worse odds than this. With the ship in lockdown, Croth and his hunters were at her mercy. But she couldn't afford to let her guard down. Croth lunged first, his speed almost a blur as he drew his weapon. But Emily was faster. She sidestepped, using his momentum against him, and slammed her elbow into the side of his helmet. He stumbled, his weapon firing wildly into the air, the blast missing her by inches. The other two hunters reacted immediately, flanking her on both sides, but Emily anticipated their moves. She dropped low, firing at one of them while simultaneously ducking under the other's strike. The blaster hit its target, the hunter crumpling to the floor, incapacitated. Croth recovered quickly, his anger palpable. He roared, charging at Emily with a ferocity she hadn't expected. But she was ready. With swift, precise movements, she ducked and weaved, using her agility to stay one step ahead. Croth was strong, but he was predictable. And predictability was his downfall. He lunged again, but this time Emily spun, using his own weight to flip him onto the ground. She stood above him, her blaster aimed squarely at his chest. "This ends now," she said. Croth growled, his hand reaching for his weapon, but Emily pressed the barrel against his armor, steady and unwavering. The ship's hum echoed around them, the silence between them pregnant with tension. "This isn't just about you," Emily said. "It's about all of us. All of humanity." Croth's eyes narrowed, his pride bruised. "You are nothing," he spat. "Just a child playing at war. A child who's about to win," Emily said, the blaster's barrel not wavering. In that moment, she knew she had won. Croth and his hunters were defeated. The ship was hers. And the galaxy was on notice. She pressed the button, sealing their fate as the ship's systems powered down, leaving Croth and his hunters stranded. It was over. The tables had turned, and Emily had proven one thing: humanity was not to be underestimated. She turned away from the fallen leader, her eyes filled with determination as she moved toward the exit. The battle was won, but the war was just beginning. And she would lead humanity into that future.